Perfect. We can create a full story based on this title in 4 parts, each around 800 words. English, no Chinese/Japanese names. With a strong HFY, humans are extraordinary. Theme. Here's Part 1. Part 1. The village slept under a silver moon, quiet except for the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant howl of a wolf. Kale, a wandering mercenary, moved through the streets with purpose, his pack light and his mind sharper than any blade he carried. In the hills above the village, a dragon hatchling cried out, a sound of desperation piercing the night air. Its scales were still damp from a recent rain, and its wing, broken in the previous day's escape from a predator, hung uselessly. Kale had heard the rumors from traveling merchants. A human had been seen risking life and limb to retrieve lost dragon eggs. Yet no one had believed anyone could survive the mountain passes and jagged cliffs without falling prey to beasts or misfortune. But Kale did not care for rumors. He had been hired, not for glory, but for necessity. A dragon child, injured and alone, required him to act, and he knew that hesitating would cost the creature its life. Kale approached the nest with measured steps. It lay half-hidden in a rocky alcove, feathers of moss and dirt clinging to the small dragon's body. The hatchling's eyes widened as he neared, but there was no fear. It sensed his intention, recognizing the aura of someone willing to act, even if the outcome was uncertain. Kale pulled 5 short blades from his pack, each honed to precise edges, not for violence against the dragon, but to clear the path of jagged rocks and entangling roots that threatened to collapse beneath their feet. Every motion was calculated, his mind anticipating danger from falling stones, loose ledges, and the predator that had claimed the hatchling's family. One by one, he moved obstacles, carving a narrow path that would allow the dragon to be carried safely, and occasionally whispered encouragement. Hold still. Almost there. You'll fly again soon. The hatchling's tiny claws clutched instinctively at the nearest rock, trusting Kale in a way few humans could expect. The climb back to the village was treacherous. Rain from earlier storms had left the stone slick, and the path was barely a ledge wide enough for one human foot. Kale adjusted his grip frequently, holding the hatchling close to his chest, checking the damaged wing and murmuring reassurances. The creatures of the night stirred as they climbed. Wolves' eyes glimmered from below, the distant roar of a mountain predator echoed faintly, and the wind threatened to sweep them both into the chasm far beneath. Yet Kale's focus never wavered. He calculated each step, each shift of weight, each delicate adjustment to keep the hatchling safe. Hours seemed to pass as they inched forward, a precarious balance of survival and care. The moon rose high and then began its descent, illuminating the jagged landscape like a silver blade. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Kale reached the edge overlooking the village. Below, lights twinkled as families slept, oblivious to the peril above. The hatchling stirred, chirping softly, and Kale realized that for the first time since it had been abandoned, it might live to see the warmth of a safe hearth. He carefully lowered himself down the cliffside, using the blades to steady the descent, clearing roots and rocks from potential hazards. With each careful movement, he sensed the hatchling relaxing slightly, trusting the human completely. It was a profound moment. A creature designed to breathe fire and command the skies now placed its life in the hands of a mortal who could barely glide safely down a mountainside. And Kale, hardened by battles, thieves, and mercenary work, felt a surge of responsibility stronger than any contract or coin could demand. When they finally reached the bottom, Kale set the hatchling gently on solid ground. Its wing hung awkwardly, scales scratched but otherwise intact. The dragon chirped faintly, nuzzling his hand in gratitude. Kale allowed himself a brief moment to breathe, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. Then, just as he turned to leave, the air changed. A low vibration thrummed through the ground beneath his boots. Shadows stretched across the valley, massive wings blotting out the stars. Kale's pulse quickened. From the treeline, figures emerged, enormous and majestic, scales shimmering in the moonlight. Dragon guardians, far larger than the hatchling, had arrived, their eyes glowing with a curious mix of wariness and acknowledgement. Kale's presence, the careful protection of the hatchling, had been observed, and now he was surrounded. Kale stood frozen for a heartbeat, taking in the immense forms surrounding him. Each dragon was larger than any he had ever seen, their scales glinting under the moon like molten metal, eyes fixed sharply on the hatchling he had just saved. The air seemed to hum with power, each beat of massive wings sending gusts that rattled loose stones. Kale knew instinctively that any wrong move could be fatal, not just to him, but to the little dragon cradled in his arms. Yet the hatchling remained calm, nestled against his chest, sensing no immediate threat from him. Somehow, it understood that these guardians were not mere predators. They were sentinels, evaluating the worth of the human who dared approach them. The lead dragon, a towering figure with scales that shifted from deep indigo to bronze as the light caught them, lowered its massive head and studied Kale intently. Its eyes were piercing, intelligent, and ancient, carrying centuries of judgment. Kale could feel the weight of that gaze pressing on him, but he did not flinch. Slowly, deliberately, he knelt on one knee, keeping his hands open and visible, showing that he bore no weapon for offense, only care for the vulnerable hatchling. The dragon let out a low rumble, a sound that resonated deep in Kale's chest, vibrating with authority. The hatchling chirped softly, as if acknowledging the presence of its kin and signaling Kale to hold firm. "What is your purpose here, human?" The lead dragon's voice thundered, though it carried no threat, only inquiry. Kale swallowed, steadying his voice despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I saved this hatchling," he said simply. "It was abandoned, injured, and left to die. I would not let that happen." The guardians murmured among themselves, voices like rolling boulders in the night. They seemed to debate not only Kale's words but his intent, testing the sincerity of his actions. The indigo-bronze dragon's gaze remained unbroken, a silent challenge weighing his resolve. Kale met it directly. "I carry no greed, no desire to harm, only protection. That is all I offer." For a moment, silence hung like a frozen lake. Then, as if acknowledging the truth in his declaration, the lead dragon dipped its head slightly. The wings of the others shifted, some brushing the ground, some flexing midair, signaling recognition and acceptance. Kale breathed a small sigh of relief, realizing that the guardians had granted him provisional trust. They would observe him, test him, but for now they understood he meant no harm. The hatchling stirred against him, wings stretching, and let out a soft trill that seemed to echo the guardian's acknowledgement. Kale allowed himself the faintest smile. He had survived the mountain, navigated treacherous cliffs, and earned the wary approval of beings who had seen centuries of betrayal and cruelty. Yet still he remained alive and the hatchling safe. The dragons did not speak again immediately, but their presence was instructive. Kale understood that their observation was more than a test. It was a silent lesson in patience, courage, and the careful management of trust. He knew that if he faltered now, if he reacted hastily or showed fear, the hatchling could be endangered, and the guardian's judgment could turn against him. So he stayed low, moving slowly, ensuring that the dragon child remained comfortable, feeding it water from a flask and speaking softly. Minutes felt like hours, but gradually, the guardian's stance relaxed. Their eyes softened, wings lowered slightly, and one of the younger guardians approached to sniff at the hatchling cautiously, as if confirming its well-being. The hatchling chirped again, brushing scales against Kale's hand, a signal of confidence and trust that the humans and dragons had begun forming a fragile bridge. Finally, the lead dragon inclined its head and spoke in a measured tone. "You have saved one of ours," it said, voice resonating like thunder across the valley. "Prove your worth, and you may walk among us safely. Fail, and the consequences will be yours alone." Kale nodded without hesitation. "I will protect it," he said simply. "Through every danger, I will not fail." The hatchling chirped in agreement, pressing against his chest as if confirming the vow. The guardians lifted into the night sky, their massive forms casting shadows that stretched across the valley. Yet they remained nearby, circling, observing, and silently agreeing to follow Kale's journey. For the first time, he understood the magnitude of what he had undertaken. Not merely saving a hatchling, but stepping into the eyes of dragonkind and proving that a single human could be worthy of trust. By the time Kale and the hatchling descended toward the safety of the village, the first hints of dawn painted the horizon in pale gold. Their path was still dangerous, filled with treacherous cliffs and lurking predators, but the presence of the dragon guardians hovering above provided a shield of authority and intimidation. Every step Kale took was deliberate, every movement calculated, and the hatchling mirrored him, learning through observation, trusting entirely in the human who had risked his life for it. In that moment, Kale realized that courage was not measured by the sharpness of a blade, but by the willingness to act when no one else could or would. And for the first time, he felt the weight of true responsibility settle into his bones, stronger than any coin, contract, or contract-bound mission he had ever known. The valley below was waking under a soft dawn light, mist curling between the rooftops of the village and clinging to the edges of stone streets. Kale descended carefully, carrying the hatchling in one arm while the 5 blades he had brought remained strapped across his back, ready to clear obstacles or defend against sudden threats. The dragon guardians circled above, their massive wings beating in steady arcs, shadows shifting over the ground like living clouds. The villagers had begun to stir, drawn by faint roars and flickers of flame, but Kale moved deliberately, keeping the hatchling close and signaling calm with every measured step. The little dragon had begun to stretch its wings, testing them lightly, sparks dancing harmlessly from its nostrils, an anxious but growing excitement in its chirps. Kale's arrival did not go unnoticed. Farmers, merchants, and children peered out from doorways and windows, murmuring in awe at the sight of a human descending from the cliffs with a dragon cradled in his arms. Some reached for weapons out of instinct, but the sheer presence of the guardians above stilled any rash action. Kale spoke gently, his voice carrying across the cobblestones. "This hatchling is injured and alone. I have brought it here for safety. Trust me, and no harm will come to anyone." A hush fell as villagers processed the sight of 5 enormous dragons hovering silently over a human protecting a tiny, vulnerable creature. The guardian's watchful eyes added weight to his words. The community realized that this was no ordinary situation. The stakes were higher than any of them had faced before. Despite the awe, not everyone was convinced. A group of hunters and villagers approached cautiously, murmuring about dragons being dangerous and unpredictable. The hatchling stiffened instinctively, wings flaring, tiny sparks igniting in nervous bursts. Kale stepped forward, placing himself firmly between the hatchling and the approaching humans, blades at the ready but relaxed, signaling only preparedness, not aggression. "Step back," he warned, tone calm but unyielding. The humans faltered, unsure if the small dragon's tiny sparks signaled threat or merely fear. Then, from above, one of the guardians descended partially, massive clawed feet barely touching the ground, scales gleaming with an intimidating sheen. The humans froze. It was a clear message. This human was under the guardian's observation, and any aggressive act could provoke consequences beyond mortal reckoning. The hatchling, sensing Kale's calm and the guardian's authority, relaxed slightly. Its wings lowered, and it chirped softly, nuzzling against Kale's chest. He mirrored its behavior, lowering his stance, speaking in soft, deliberate words to both the villagers and the hatchling. "You see, no one here will harm you if you trust the guidance I offer," he murmured. Slowly, villagers began to understand the dynamic. The hatchling's trust in Kale was genuine, earned through patience, courage, and the willingness to protect. Fear gave way to fascination, then admiration, as the villagers witnessed the bond forming in real time. Children edged closer, reaching out cautiously to touch the dragon's scales, while adults whispered among themselves, marveling that a human could inspire such trust in a creature of raw instinct and power. By mid-morning, Kale and the hatchling had reached a small clearing near the village square, a safe place where they could rest and observe without fear of attack. The hatchling began exploring cautiously, flapping wings in short bursts, testing its strength. Kale kept one hand ready to steady it, guiding it gently without restricting movement. The dragon guardians hovered nearby, their eyes scanning the surroundings but showing no aggression. Slowly, the hatchling chirped and twirled, beginning to respond to Kale's subtle signals. A glance, a hand gesture, or a gentle hum. They were forming a language of trust, communication that bridged human and dragon instinct. Villagers watched in silence, absorbing the lesson that courage, patience, and protection often outweighed brute strength. By afternoon, the village had accepted their presence. Kale and the hatchling moved among the streets, demonstrating the careful balance of freedom and guidance. The hatchling now responded to Kale's direction with confidence, leaping short distances and glancing back for reassurance, rather than fear. The guardians, still circling above, seemed satisfied with the hatchling's progress and Kale's steady leadership. Children followed, curious but respectful, and even skeptical villagers began offering food and soft shelter. Kale realized that his mission had evolved. He had not only saved a dragon but had begun to teach a community that humans and dragons could coexist when respect and care guided their interactions. As evening fell, the hatchling curled into Kale's arms, its body warm and steady, wings folded in relaxation. Above, the guardians dipped and hovered in silent observation, their immense forms reflecting the moonlight. Kale knew that the trust he had earned would not be forgotten and that the hatchling's life, and the lives of those who might one day rely on its strength, depended on vigilance, patience, and courage. In the quiet of the village square, under the watchful eyes of dragon guardians, he felt a rare sense of accomplishment. Not through conquest or fear, but through the quiet power of a human who had risked everything to protect the helpless, bridging a gap between species that had long been defined by distance and misunderstanding. Night had fully fallen when Kale finally settled near the village edge, the hatchling tucked safely against his chest. The dragon guardians hovered silently above, immense shadows against the moonlit sky, their wings beating slowly in a steady rhythm that filled the air with a low hum. Kale knew that the final test was not just survival, it was earning the guardians' full recognition, proving that a single human could be worthy of trust not only in action but in heart. He had carried the hatchling across cliffs, protected it from predators, and faced wary villagers, but now, the weight of their judgment pressed most heavily. Every movement, every word, every gesture would be observed, measured, and remembered. A sudden rustle in the trees drew his attention. From the shadows, a pack of rogue hunters emerged, emboldened by the night and unaware of the guardian's presence. Weapons glinted under the moonlight, and they moved with a predator's confidence, convinced the small dragon could be claimed easily. The hatchling stiffened instinctively, wings flaring, flames flickering nervously from its nostrils. Kale stepped forward without hesitation, planting himself firmly between the threat and the dragon. "Back!" he commanded, voice firm yet calm, a tone that carried authority born of experience. The hunters paused, startled by his unwavering stance, but pressed on with arrogance. In response, the guardians descended with breathtaking speed. Their massive forms eclipsed the moon, claws scraping stone, wings beating gusts that knocked several hunters to the ground. Thunderous roars filled the air, shaking loose debris and leaving no doubt who ruled the skies. Kale did not flinch. He held the hatchling steady, murmuring reassurances, guiding it to crouch safely against him. The hatchling responded instinctively, tiny claws gripping Kale's cloak as sparks of fire danced in the air, a coordinated warning that mirrored the guardian's display. Together, human and dragon presented a united front, a testament to trust forged through patience and courage. The hunters fled, their confidence shattered by the synchronized force of guardians and hatchling, and Kale exhaled, feeling the tension drain from his body. The lead guardian landed lightly on a nearby hillock, eyes sweeping over him and the hatchling with a weight that was both evaluative and approving. "You have proven your courage," the dragon rumbled, voice resonating like rolling thunder. "You have protected what is most precious without faltering, without fear, and without desire for glory. You are worthy of our trust." The hatchling chirped softly, nuzzling Kale's hand, and Kale realized the enormity of what had occurred. The dragons had not only acknowledged his deeds, but accepted him as a protector, an ally, and a friend. In the days that followed, Kale and the hatchling became a symbol of unity and courage. Villagers left food and blankets near their shelter, and the guardians often hovered nearby, a silent patrol that ensured safety and respect. The hatchling grew stronger, testing wings with every passing day, learning the balance of trust, guidance, and independence. Kale taught it to respond to signals, to navigate threats, and to understand that courage was not recklessness, but steady, deliberate protection. Slowly, the village accepted the presence of dragons as a natural, if extraordinary, part of their world, inspired by a human who had risked everything for one small life. By nightfall, Kale sat beneath a silvered sky, the hatchling nestled on his shoulders, warm and calm. Above, the guardians circled information, their presence protective yet non-intrusive, a constant reminder of the bond forged through sacrifice and courage. He looked down at the tiny dragon, now chirping and testing short flights, sparks of fire flickering harmlessly in celebration. In that quiet, moonlit moment, he understood that a single human could indeed alter the fate of dragonkind, earning respect through empathy, bravery, and unwavering care. And as the hatchling rested its head against him, breathing softly, Kale realized that life's greatest victories were not measured in gold or battle, but in the trust, hope, and loyalty he had inspired, a human who had truly awakened the hearts of dragons.